Welcome to the bonkers.ie podcast. I'm your host, Caoimhe Birmingham, and today myself and my colleague Daragh Cassidy will be taking a deep dive into the 2024 budget. We look at who came best and worst off, what the budget offers the average worker, and we ask whether this year's budget goes far enough to put money back in our pockets. So if you want to hear the ins and outs of this year's budget and what it means for you, stay tuned. So, Daragh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Caoimhe.
So, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, the latest budget. So, as we know, the cost of living crisis was the focal point for this budget. Announced by Minister Michael McGrath and Pascal O'Donoghue, this huge 14 billion budget package saw a boost in permanent spending and large cash giveaways in the form of tax relief, welfare payments and energy credits. So, Daragh, can you just tell me what were the main takeaways from the upcoming budget?
Well, it was a big budget, as you've mentioned there. It was 14 billion euros, so it was generous. A lot of that was weighted more in favour of spending than tax cuts. So some people, maybe workers and middle income earners, might have hoped that the weighting was a little bit more evenly divided in terms of spending increases versus tax cuts, because it was, like I said, 13-1 in favour of spending increases. And it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about it being a 2-1 ratio in favour of spending increases. So a lot of new spending, a lot of one-off measures to cope with the cost of living. There'll be extra social welfare payments, very similar to last year, some tax changes which will put a little bit of money back into people's pockets, and also some energy credits as well to help cope with high energy prices. So it was, I think, a generous budget. You couldn't say it wasn't when 14 billion euro was being spent. I guess the big debate that will rage on, as it always is was the money spent correctly? Should have been spent differently? And I guess that's what we can kind of talk through over the next half an hour or so.
Yeah, and as we know, to give a backdrop to everybody, I'm sure everyone's aware that there is a cost of living crisis going on. Inflation is at 5%, and mortgage rates are over 4% now, and energy and rental prices are at really high levels. Now, a lot of the time people say that the people who are bearing the brunt of the cost of living crisis is the middle class, the working middle class, otherwise known as the squeezed middle. Coming up to the budget, a lot of people were saying that this was going to be designed to really help the middle class kind of survive. Is that the case?
I think some people might be maybe a little bit disappointed. Beforehand, there was a lot of talk about this €1,000 tax cut that Fine Gael were going to give, and Fine Gael have constantly been saying they're going to increase their standard rate cut-off point, at the point at which people start paying the top 40% rate of tax. That was going to be increased to around €50,000. Now, it's never going to be done in this budget, but Fine Gael have been talking about that for years, and we're still really nowhere near it. There was, of course, changes to the carbon tax, which is going to hit some people again in their pockets. It also saw petrol and diesel go up. So I think there was something that was done for the squeezed middle, and of course there is an extra child benefit payment that's being paid. But I think some people might feel that maybe a little bit more could have been done, and there was just examples where the government on the one hand was giving, but on the other hand was taking. I think it was maybe more focused, and people might say this was the right thing to do, on lower income earners. I mean, there was a lot of, again, very generous one-off payments, and we saw a big increase in the minimum wage. The ESRI has come out to say that actually proportionately it impacts more favourably the lower income households, and that might have been the right approach to take. But in the context of, was this a budget for the squeezed middle? Maybe not quite, but I think there was something for everyone.
And speaking of something for everyone, one of the main concerns that people would have been worried about in the upcoming year is energy prices. Now, the government has just announced that they will be giving another electricity credit like they did last year, and this year it's going to be for €450. So can you just tell us a little bit about the electricity credit that's been issued?
Sure. So listeners might remember that last year there was a €600 credit that was paid out, and even though we are seeing energy prices begin to decrease slightly, and over the coming weeks, most suppliers are going to decrease their prices by about 10 to 20%. Energy prices this winter are still going to be around double normal levels. So I think the government was very, very cognizant of that. It's something that bonkers.ie has spoken about hugely. We put pressure as well on the government to support households. So the support this time is a little bit less generous, which I think was always going to be the case. So there is going to be a €450 credit that's paid to all residential electricity households over the coming months, and it'll be divided into three €150 installments. So last year we saw three €200 installments. This year we're seeing three €150 installments. The first one is going to be paid in December. The second one is due to be paid in January, and then the third one is due to be paid in March of 2024. So I think that'll help people cope with the high electricity costs that they're going to get. Again, like last year, though, it can't be paid if you're a gas customer. And I know that is a frustration that some people have, that they might have really, really high gas bills and actually quite low electricity bills. But that's just the way it's been structured.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to point out, because currently in Ireland, 24% of gas customers are in arrears. So they're not able to pay their bills. And on the other hand, 12% of electricity customers are unable to pay their bills. But even with these credits, Daragh, will they go far enough? Like, we know that electricity prices this winter are expected to be double what they were 18 months ago. So what other things can people do?
Well, the other measure there as well, though, is that the government did say that they're going to keep the reduced rate of VAT at 9%. So I was afraid the government was going to increase the rate of VAT to 13.5%. If it had done that, it actually would have added around €150 to the average annual gas and electricity bill, which in essence would have meant one of the credits was just being sucked back up. So I really did have to say I welcomed the fact that there was a €450 credit, and then the VAT is staying at 9% for another year, and I'd be putting pressure on the government actually to continue that for the foreseeable future, as I think as we try to move towards net zero, it's going to put a lot of pressure on electricity prices. As well as that, there was also the fuel allowance lump sum payment. So people who are in receipt of the fuel allowance will get €33 a week, as they usually do, and also they will get before Christmas a €300 lump sum payment. So, and that's on top of the €450 that they will be getting from the government as well. So that's, I think, a good bit of support, and I think that'll help a lot of households. But then on top of that, obviously looking at switching supplier to save even more money. You can save another €340, €300 or €400 by switching, and also just looking at ways to use less electricity and heat and so on around the home.
Yeah, and it's really important just to say, with switching electricity supplier, a lot of people get confused about this. They think they will lose their electricity credit if they switch suppliers, but they won't.
No, the electricity credit follows you. So how it works, like getting too technical, is every time the government issues it literally just gets sent to every supplier's domestic electricity customer. So you don't have to be with your supplier for a certain number of weeks or to have passed any type of criteria. If you're a customer, you'll get it. So absolutely, people can still switch and they'll get any future credits that they're entitled to.
Cut the cost of your electricity bills on bonkers.ie. Compare and switch electricity deals from Ireland's main energy suppliers in seconds with the help of our free electricity comparison tool.
And there was some other good news in relation to renewable energy. So people who have solar panels, there was good news for people who do microgeneration in their home.
There was a small measure that may have gone over some people's heads. So now, as a result of the microgeneration scheme, you can be paid for any excess electricity that you generate, either from solar panels or if you're a community centre and you have a little wind farm. But for most people, it's going to be solar panels. Up until this budget, you could earn €200 tax-free from your energy supplier, and now that's being raised to €400. So it just means that people can earn that little bit more. And to be honest, when you get solar panels, most people will, unless you have a huge solar panel on your home, most people will end up being able to, I suppose, generate excess electricity that's only worth around €300 or €400 anyway. So it does mean that the average household is going to be able to earn all of that tax-free, which is good.
Speaking of the environment and the backdrop of the Climate Action Plan, I want to look specifically at carbon tax. Was there any changes made?
There was, and the increase in the carbon tax has kind of been baked into government policy, so it kind of goes unnoticed now during budget day. But the carbon tax was increased by to €7.50 per tonne of CO2 to €56. So what that basically means is that it is adding around 3 cents to a litre of petrol and diesel.
Okay.
So listeners may already have seen the price at the pump go up slightly. And on top of that, it's going to add around another maybe 17 or 18 euro to the average annual gas bill. Now, that increase doesn't kick in until next May. But when it does kick in, it does mean that around maybe 120 to 130 euro of your average annual gas bill is now going to be carbon tax. And it's also, of course, going to impact on the price of coal and the price of briquettes. So when I said that in some ways the government was giving us money, this is another way in which it is taking money back. On the flip side, though, there was some good measures from a public transport point of view.
Yes.
The Youth Leap travel card, which gives cheaper public transport to kind of youths and people up until now, until the age of 23. That's been extended to 25. So I think that's really, really encouraging. And I think there's a conscious effort by government there to get people, I suppose, addicted, if you could use the word, to public transport when they're young, so that they maybe don't even buy a car in the first place. And then on top of that, the reduction in public transport fares of 20%, which was brought in around 2 years ago by the government as a cost of living measure, has been continued for another year. So if anyone is listening who has maybe an annual bus rate, a Lewis pass that maybe used to cost €1,800 would now be around €1,500. So that's actually saving people money as well. So that's something that the government does need to be commended on.
Yeah, if you look at the flip side, it is for the environment.
Yes.
So that is something we need to remember. Daragh, let's take a look at taxes and wages next.
Yes.
Because a lot of people are obviously concerned about that with cost of living and being able to pay their way in life. So there were rumours that the standard tax rate band was going to increase, and they were correct. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so there's two main measures. The first one is that the rate at which people start paying the top rate of tax, the 40% rate of tax, increased from 40,000 to 42,000 euro. So that means anyone who's earning over 42,000 euro would benefit by the full amount, which is 400 euro a year. It basically means 2,000 extra euro is being taxed at 20% instead of 40%. Now that 42,000 euro cut-off is still quite low by international standards, but it wasn't so long ago in Ireland. It was around 32 or 33,000 euros. So it has gone up a little bit over the past few years. The other measure was that there was also a 100 euro increase to both the PAYE tax credit and the personal tax credit, so 200 euro in total. Now, I know people get a little bit confused between tax credits and tax relief, but basically a tax credit pretty much just is cash back into your pocket. So when I say there was a 200 euro increase, what that means for most workers is that you'll benefit by 200 euro.
And what about USC?
So the USC is obviously a controversial topic. There were some tweaks to the USC. The main tweak is that the second USC rate, so the 4.5% rate, has been reduced to 4%. And also on top of that, the mid-band, so the band where you get charged 2%, has been increased by just under 3,000 euro. So basically it means you're being charged a little bit more at 2% as opposed to previously 4.5%. Now, it's not necessarily going to save people a huge amount of money, and how much you save in this case will depend on how much you earn. But for example, just tweaking the 2% band, it was 22,920 euro. It's now gone up to 25,760 euro. That would save you around 71 euro a year. So anyone who's earning over around 26,000 euro would benefit by the full amount. The second tweaks of reducing the 4.5% rate to 4% could save you over 200 euro if you benefited by the full amount. It would depend how much you earn.
So all in all, Daragh, how much money is this going to be putting back in people's pockets?
So if you're someone that can benefit from the full amount, which in particular applies for the USC change, so let's say you were earning 70,000 euro and you benefited by the full amount, you would save around maybe 800 to 900 euro a year based on these taxation changes alone. But if you're on the average industrial wage of maybe between maybe 45 to 50,000 euro, you'd be saving around maybe 700 euro. So it's not necessarily a huge amount of money, because that's obviously over the course of a year. And really some of these changes are just to kind of keep up with inflation, because with wage growth and inflation running at around maybe 5.5% a year, really people next year aren't going to change. They might be paying a little bit less in tax, but the percentage of their income that they hand over to the government is going to be relatively similar. And in fact, at the moment, in Ireland, we're seeing almost record numbers of people paying the top rate of tax, that 40% rate of tax. And next year we might see that number increase. So it's nice that there were some changes, but
people aren't going to feel it that much.
Yeah, particularly just with some of the cost pressures and the increase in prices that we're still seeing. But on top of that, obviously we need to remember the energy credits, which is €450, and some of the social welfare measures as well, which we'll discuss shortly. They will, of course, put money back into people's pockets. But if you're just a PAYE worker who isn't getting social welfare, the maximum you're looking at is around maybe €800 to €900 a year, and then the energy credits if you're getting them.
Now, there have been some tax reliefs announced for renters, because obviously the renting crisis is a very big topic at the moment. So the rental credit that was issued last year, which was €500, has now been increased to €750. But also, landlords have also had a tax break. So what's the story with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, with the landlords, it's obviously quite controversial, but the measures are to try and keep landlords in the market. And my feeling at this stage is there have been so many landlords that have left. The rental market is an absolute disaster. We all know that. The government may as well just try something different. And if it doesn't work, then they can just reverse it next year. That's just my opinion. I think the rental credit is different. It's gone up to €750. And as I kind of said beforehand, people can get a bit confused between rent tax credits and tax relief. But basically what it means is that you can reduce your rent by €750. If you file a tax return at the end of the year, apply for this credit, you'll get €750 back into your pocket. Now, you do need to meet certain terms and conditions, like you need to be paying a certain amount of rent. If you're living at home when you're paying rent to your mum and dad, it isn't included. But if you're renting privately, the vast majority of renters should be able to apply for this. The big caveat, though, is that your landlord does need to be registered with the RTB. And there are cases of people finding out that their landlord isn't actually registered. I have heard, though, of people saying that when they do go to apply for the credit, you can just, tick that your landlord is registered, or you don't necessarily have to show proof. But in theory, they are supposed to be registered. So that's just something for people to bear in mind. But basically, if you are a renter and you are listening to this and you're thinking, there was nothing for me in the budget, there's €750 there, because a lot of people hadn't even applied for the credit last year. And of course, you can apply as well retrospectively up to 4 years. So if you didn't apply for the €500 last year, you can do it. And if you're renting, the €750 there potentially to help you.
Now, homeowners also got an announcement that they are going to be getting a relief scheme as well. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a little bit controversial. It's basically to help people who have seen their mortgage rates go up over the past year, which will predominantly be people on variable rates, but also trackers. Now, tracker customers, though, have enjoyed really, really low rates for a very long period of time. And I actually would argue that the people that really, really need to be helped are renters and people who are trying to get on the property ladder. People who already are lucky enough to have a home can count themselves relatively lucky, all things considered. I mean, I know we all have our own problems going on in life, but like if you've gotten on the property ladder, you've saved up your deposit, you are doing quite well. So they're getting basically tax relief of up to €1,250. That's the maximum amount that you can possibly claim. But basically how it works is that it is worth 20% of the increase that you have seen between the end of 2022 and the end of 2023. So if your mortgage payment went up by €300, let's say a month, or €3,600 over the year, you can claim back 20% of that €3,600 up to a maximum of 1,250. At the moment, it's only going to apply for this year. It may, though, be extended next year, and you may be able to apply for it again. I don't know. But you do need to be local property tax compliant. It can only apply on your main residence where you live. So if you have a holiday home or a second home that you've been renting out, you can't apply for that.
Now, a lot of people say that childcare costs is basically like having a second mortgage out. But this year, the government did announce even further reductions for childcare costs, an extra 25%.
Yes, that is great. And it's building on previous announcements and previous budgets. The increase, though, isn't going to come into effect until next September. So that's maybe something that some households might be disappointed with. The minister, when he was describing it, was saying he doesn't want too much money to be rushing into the economy at the same time, which is fair enough. But yeah, some households, I'm sure, and families will be a little bit disappointed that it's not coming in sooner, but it's a huge cost for a lot of young families and a lot of households. I think it's definitely going to be warmly welcomed by them.
And there was also free books announced as well for secondary school education.
Yes, this builds on the free books for primary schools. The caveat here, though, is that it is not for fee-paying schools. So if you are in a fee-paying school, if your son or daughter was in a fee-paying school, it's actually not going to apply. It actually didn't apply for primary schools either, but because so few primary schools are fee-paying, I think that important note or caveat went over a lot of people's heads. So that's just something for people to know.
Yeah, just up to junior cycle as well.
And sorry, just for the first 3 years. It might be extended to senior cycle next year, but yeah, just for the first 3 years.
And what about people's everyday costs? So like alcohol, cigarettes, they're usually targeted in the budget. And were they this time?
So cigarette smokers are going to get an extra 75 cents on a packet of ciggies.
Not going to be happy.
No, which brings the price of 20 up to close to maybe €17. Yeah. So it ain't cheap. Alcohol was spared again, although we have the highest alcohol excise duty on wine in all of Europe. So we're already being hit hard there, but people might breathe a small sigh of relief. And obviously minimum unit pricing on alcohol, which was brought in at the start of 2022, has already increased the price of certainly cheaper drink for a lot of people. The petrol and diesel excise wasn't changed, but as we've discussed, the carbon tax was. That's going to add around 3 cents to a litre of petrol and diesel. So not kind of, I suppose, great news if you're maybe a driver or if you're a heavy smoker. And it does look as if there is going to be some type of a tax put on vaping next year.
So another big topic was social welfare. There were a lot of big measures announced this year. So can you tell me a little bit about them, Daragh?
Yeah, so the government was quite generous again this year in terms of the social welfare measures, and there was a lot of one-off payments again to help people cope with the cost of living crisis. So just going through maybe first of all the one-off payments. So there is a one-off €400 payment to carers and those on disability allowance. Those getting the living alone allowance will get a one-off €200 payment. Those getting the working family payment will get €400, and those in receipt of the invalidity pension will receive a €400 payment. And as we discussed earlier on, if you are getting the fuel allowance, you'll receive a €300 payment. And most of those payments will all be given over the coming weeks before Christmas.
And was there any changes to the actual benefits themselves?
There was. So there was another €12 across the board increase payments that will come into effect from January. So those getting the dole, people in receipt for pension, they'll get an extra €12 a week from January. And then also on top of that, the Christmas bonus is being paid again to all social welfare recipients in early December. And then there'll also be a double payment to all social welfare recipients in January. And then there'll also be a double child benefit payment worth €140 per child that will be paid over the coming weeks. So there was, I guess, quite a lot of payments. I mean, some people will be getting the Christmas bonus. Sometimes some workers might be looking at this saying, hey, there's a lot being given, but not so much to me, because like I said, you're going to get, in some cases, your double child benefit payment, Christmas bonus, another payment in early January, and then you could potentially be getting maybe 2 lump sum payments depending on what you're actually entitled to. So I do think it was quite generous, but of course every year there are people who feel that it should have been even more generous. But I do think we need to remember, as I said, there was €1 billion tax cuts for workers versus €13 billion in spending. So I think the government, in terms of its focus, it was very much more on those who are on social welfare as opposed to those who are working, I think.
So your final thoughts, Daragh, was this a good or a bad budget?
I do think it was a good budget. I mean, you can't complain if the government spends €14 billion. Ireland is a small country of only 5 million people. To be giving out €14 billion, it is a huge amount. I think the debate will be maybe could some of the measures have been a little bit more targeted. I'd like to have seen maybe a little bit more for the squeezed middle, and maybe a slightly higher tax cuts. It could have gone up to maybe €1.5 billion, and would have liked to have seen that standard rate cut off maybe go to €45,000, and maybe have seen the USC being reduced a little bit as well. But inflation is still running at a high level as well, and there is a fear that this could stimulate the economy too much, although obviously there'll be people getting money who badly need it, but there is a fear that maybe it could stimulate the economy a little bit too much. But I do think the government was generous, and it did set up some of those funds for future long-term planning, which it has to be commended for as well.
So 14 billion euro is a lot of money, Daragh. And as you mentioned, we are a small country. So where is this money coming from?
A lot of it is coming from these windfall corporation tax receipts. Now, having said that, we also have record numbers of people at work. So income tax receipts are also growing as well. But over the past few years, we have gotten in billions of euro in extra corporation tax that we weren't expecting. And it has really helped us, I suppose, not have to take the difficult decisions that other countries have to take during COVID, and also even with Brexit. We've been awash with money, and we haven't had to actually borrow to spend any of this extra money. So in many ways, we're in a very, very lucky position. The fear, though, is that it's not going to last. The fear is that some of these companies could leave, or that they're just shifting their profits from location to location, and that maybe overnight several billion euro could almost evaporate. But it is mainly coming, like I said, from corporate tax receipts, which have just ballooned into space for around 5 years.
That's interesting that you say that we are awash with money, yet we're in a cost of living crisis and people are struggling to make ends meet.
It is. And having said that, when you look at some of the figures, record numbers of cars are being sold. Dublin Airport has never been busier, but obviously some people are struggling far more than others. When I say we've never been awash with money, it's more the government. But equally, the government has so many big spending initiatives coming down the road that it does need to be saving for and planning for. So some people might say, well, why didn't you spend more? Why didn't you spend a 20 billion euro budget and give 800 euro tax credits and all sorts? I mean, we've got a metro line that we need to build. We've more Lewis lines. Cork wants a Lewis line, and rightly so.
Yeah.
We have still more road infrastructure that needs to be updated. We need to be saving for our future pensions. We need to be saving for the climate initiatives that we need to start tackling. We need to invest in our electricity grid. We need to invest probably now, given where things are basically everywhere in the world. We need to be investing more probably in our defence. So there's lots of demands on the government over the coming years. So, and actually on that, PRSI, which is something we actually touched on, is going to go up from October. So it kind of went over people's heads again, but all PRSI rates are going to go up by 0.1% from the 1st of October 2024.
And what does that mean?
It's a tiny increase, but it does mean that from the 1st of November, everyone is going to see their tax go up actually slightly, which is unusual because usually we only see these changes on the 1st of January after budget day. But depending on what you're earning, it could be anywhere from maybe just 5 to 30 euro a year. So it's not a significant amount, but it does look as if it's going to increase again actually in the next budget and the next budget. So we need to start preparing for higher PRSI rates.
Bonkers.ie is a one-stop shop for saving on all your household bills. Switch and save today across a range of energy, broadband, banking and insurance products with our free, easy-to-use tool.
And that brings us to the end of our budget special. I want to give a special thanks to Daragh Cassidy for sharing all his insights into the 2024 budget. And I also want to give a shout out to our research and editing team. So thank you, Zoe and Theo. If you want to learn more about how the budget will impact you, head over to bonkers.ie today and read our article, which covers everything you need to know. There you will also find a variety of tips and advice on how to cut your household expenses and put money back in your pocket. Bonkers.ie also provides a variety of free and easy to use comparison tools which will help you save money across energy, broadband, insurance and banking products too. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the bonkers.ie podcast on your podcast app of choice and follow us on Instagram and TikTok for our top money saving tips. Bye for now.